Hello and welcome back to Book and Page. We are looking at the first half of Act 1, Scene 2 in today's video. So as always, let's go ahead and start with a brief summary of what happened in this section of the frogs, and then talk about things in a little more depth. So, Dionysus, in the outfit of Hercules, is now at the door of Hades' palace. Though he's not really great at acting out the part. It is enough, though, to fool the gatekeeper. Evidently, he remembers Hercules coming down and stealing Cerberus from Hades. The gatekeeper was in charge of him, and he's out for revenge for the poor dog. He's planning on whipping the man, and he heads off to get all the equipment he needs. Poor Dionysus is deeply affected by this, to the point where, upon asking for a sponge, his servant realizes he shit himself again. But at least Dionysus is brave enough to clean himself up. He then is also brave enough to convince Zan to switch roles with him. Zan will now be Hercules, while Dionysus will serve as the porter. The moment the switch is made, though, a beautiful handmaiden of Queen of Hades, Persephone, comes out to invite the great Hercules in for a meal, and maybe a few dancing girls. Zan originally refuses, but upon the mention of the dancing girls, agrees. Dionysus isn't pleased and demands to switch back because he's the god, and if anyone's getting dancing girls, it's him. The moment they switch back, though, well, it's not really working out for poor Dionysus. Or really poor Hercules, all things considered. Two landladies that Hercules apparently ate all their stuff and then skipped out on the bill arrive in order to decide to charge Dionysus in the form of Hercules. They head off to find somebody to take him to court and probably execute him for his crimes. Excellent. Dionysus once more demands that Zan switch back with him, having to sort of cajole him into doing it, and Zan does. There is a strange interaction between the chorus and Zan then about trying to actually act the part of Hercules so he doesn't get outed. Or switch back again. Dionysus apparently all the flutter about what he can do today. It's a shorter section, but keep in mind that all this action would be prolonged by the fact that they would be constantly switching costumes with each other and switching props. So the physical comedy is probably taking up a little more time than just the reading of the comedy. Altogether, it is one of those tropes of comedies, which is mistaken identity. Somehow this outfit is enough to fool people into thinking Dionysus is Hercules. Well, why is that possible? We are assuming that these two characters look nothing like Hercules, but they have two critical things, which is the lion's cape and the club. Why does this give them away? Well, those are the images in which Hercules is best recognized. He has the skin of the Numidian lion, which he killed, which is actually impervious to attacks. That's why he wears it. And his club, because Hercules is a bit more raw strength than anything else. The club isn't his only weapon. In fact, he is known to use a couple of things. The Hydra, he ends up using swords, while his nephew uses fire to ultimately defeat it. And in some cases, he doesn't even use weapons. He uses the world around him, like the point he diverted an entire river to clean out some very nasty stables. Most of the time, it's pure strength. In fact, they mention this here with poor Cerberus, who got throttled in the process, which some versions of the legend do talk about. Some, it's actually like Hades allows Cerberus to go and is returned. Other versions of the legend, Hercules does put him in basically a stranglehold and ultimately accidentally throttles the dog on the way. That's the version we're going for. So you can kind of understand why the gatekeeper might be a little mad. That poor dog didn't deserve to die like that. Can a dog in the underworld die? That's the weird thing, though, because if you look at it, Hercules, as an identifiable trait, strong, probably one of the first ones named. You think you'd be looking for the big muscles of the man, not for the lion, cape, and club. Yet somehow, these are the identifiable traits. Now keep in mind, and if you watched our Percy Jackson videos, we did discuss this a little bit there too, but visual identifiers are very, very useful. Especially then if you're using a picture-style language. If you're looking at a bunch of figures that have been carved into a wall, it's a lot easier to find the one wearing the lion skin and identify him as Hercules, just as you would identify Zeus with a lightning bolt and Athena with her Gorgon's shield. Altogether, though, that's not really how it works in real life. Now, with a lot of muscle-bound men in a war scene or a hero scene, the lion mane helps. But if you are identifying someone face to face, you're going to be seeing a little more than that. That's why this kind of really works in a comedy. Joking about the iconography and how much we rely on it, probably kind of the point. Like, we're not just laughing at Dionysus and Zan here, though those are our focus. We should also be laughing at everybody else for being utterly fooled by these absolute idiots dressed up like Hercules. None of us are sitting there going, oh yes, no, those landladies are perfectly correct. No, it's funny because all of these people are making the mistakes, even when they keep switching. And you can always play this up, right? It's possible that as this was being performed, the switch between the two characters became less and less pronounced. For example, maybe someone ended up wearing the lion skin, but somebody else was holding the club and they had to grab it back real quick. That's how you play up the comedy. And it's even funnier if the other people don't notice that. They don't notice how awkward this is because they're so focused on the images that announce Hercules that they're not seeing the person themselves. Suddenly images, while useful in some contexts, are actually really, really misleading in others. And again, this is the point that's being drawn out here. If you rely too much on one or two simple tricks, you're gonna miss what's actually happening. And if you're constantly just getting the idea that you can understand somebody from one or two parts of that person, well then you're really messed up. And ultimately, this is actually going to result in the punishment of somebody innocent of those crimes. Yes, if you get so wrapped up in your own anger and you take it out on somebody that vaguely matches the description of the perpetrator, well, you're at fault too. This is made even worse by how idiotic Dionysus and Zan are acting. It's not really fair that ultimately they're going to get punished. But we're laughing along with it because everybody in this scene is being stupid. No one's really paying attention to what's actually happening. And ultimately it means that unfair things happen. This is actually a warning. You need to look a little deeper in things. You can't just trust surface iconography. It will lead you astray. You also can't get greedy. That's why we actually have this whole bumbling episode. Both of these characters want the good things in life, but not the bad things. And ultimately, in trying to avoid the bad things and only receive the good, we're going to get to the point where you're only getting the bad. This is actually a really important aspect of Greek philosophy, which is a balance to everything. You always have to balance things out. And to constantly try to lean one way or the other, you're going to screw up your balance even worse. What's absolutely fascinating is how much Aristophanes is sort of seen as the anti-Socrates, the one taking the Mickey out of philosophy, but he's actually offering his own philosophical viewpoint, which, again, is about that balance. By trying to pretend you're somebody you're not, bigger and better than what you are, you ultimately forget who you are, and don't get rewarded, only punished. For example, Dionysus should be able to come in here as Dionysus. Hades would probably respect him more as a god on a god than he does on a demigod that kind of ended up in a different position, especially if Hercules did not have Hades' permission to take the dog. Like, why would you pick this character to come into? Well, that's because Hercules sounds big and exciting and gets what he wants. Well, trying to act like somebody that you're not, you're forgetting your own power, your own positives and negatives, and how you can actually use that yourself. Dionysus does pull the I'm a god card here, but if he just pulled that from the beginning, we might not be having nearly as much problems. Why did he have to row for Charon? He could have just been like, ha, I'm Dionysus, row the boat. But Aristophanes here is pulling on the strings of how you envision yourself and how you envision other people. And unfortunately, we tend to simplify how we envision other people. That's why we keep mistaking these people for actually Hercules. So Dionysus, in going through this adventure, picked Hercules because he's got this simplified idea of him, the big strong hero that always wins. Well, that idea is being complicated here. He also seems to be a ladies' man who eats a lot and skips out on his bills, does things that pisses a lot of people off, and those poor people get punished for it. We're getting a more complicated look at Hercules that everyone's keeping simple by seeing the lion skin. If Dionysus had visualized Hercules as a more complex character, he might not be in this position, because he would know he himself, as Dionysus, has better advantages here. But Dionysus forgets he's Dionysus half the time. He pulls the I'm a god card on his servant, who is the last person he needs to pull this card on. He really should be pulling it on the boatman, the gatekeeper, you know, anyone else. And ultimately, it's actually Zan who's going to figure out he can pull this card. But he's playing a different role. Dionysus, if he was just himself, wouldn't have to do any of this. But he's got an image of other people in his head that everyone else is buying into too. That's why you always gotta read deeper, folks, because the image up front is simplified so you can identify it. It's not simplified because it's that simple. I'm gonna keep reading, and I hope you do too. See you next time.